Welcome, and thank you for joining us. Please note that this AI-generated podcast is intended solely for general learning and educational purposes. While we strive to ensure accuracy, the AI may occasionally produce errors or incomplete information. We strongly encourage you to consult qualified professionals and conduct your own due diligence before making any legal, financial, or business decisions based on the content presented here. Also, if you find this content valuable, we kindly request you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell to receive updates on future episodes. Let's begin.
Okay, let's dive in. Picture this for a second. A world where, one tiny slip in grammar, not just a typo, maybe an it without a clear meaning, or a comma in the wrong spot, doesn't just, get you a red mark from your English teacher. No, it could actually risk derailing, literally, billion-dollar inventions, the future of tech even. Sounds pretty dramatic, right? But, well, that's not some sci-fi plot. It's the intense, high-stakes reality of drafting patents. This isn't your average technical writing. It's more like crafting a unique legal language, a super meticulous blueprint where every single word choice is a massive legal and financial decision. So today we're doing a real deep dive into grammar's precision in patent drafting. Our mission really is to unpack why these seemingly tiny linguistic details aren't just about, good writing style. They could actually make or break a patent's legal force. We're turning what look like dry grammar rules into some, frankly, fascinating insights about how language subtle shifts in language shapes the whole world of innovation. And honestly, this isn't just for patent lawyers or inventors out there. If you've ever wondered how these super precise legal documents get built, or how language works in these incredibly high-stakes situations, or maybe you just love those aha moments, then this deep dive, I think, will give you a shortcut to understanding a hidden but totally vital part of our modern world. Get ready to see grammar in a whole new light.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because we're talking about a space where language really goes beyond just, communicating ideas. It becomes this incredibly rigorous tool for legally drawing lines in the sand, defining boundaries. It's a very specialized type of technical writing. Precision, clarity, unambiguity, they're not just nice to haves, they are absolutely paramount. Unlike, say, marketing copy or even just general English, where you might use some stylistic flair, a clever phrase maybe to make it engaging, in patent language, you actively, consciously sacrifice that kind of creative freedom for strict, almost mathematical adherence to grammatical rules. The goal isn't elegance, it's to legally define the exact scope of an invention, leaving zero room for doubt.
Right, so it's about absolute, cold, hard legal definition. The stakes must be unbelievably high then for something that seems so small, like a comma, to have such a huge impact.
Oh, unbelievably high. A single misplaced comma, like you said, or maybe an ambiguous pronoun, an it, that could refer to two different things, or even inconsistent verb tenses that muddle the functionality. These can have truly catastrophic consequences. We're talking about an error that could lead to a patent claim just being flat out rejected during examination at the patent office. Or maybe even worse, the patent gets invalidated years down the road in incredibly expensive litigation. Just imagine.
Yeah.
Years of R&D, potentially billions invested in a new technology, all hanging by the thread of a tiny grammatical slip-up that suddenly lets competitors just walk right past your IP.
Wow. So this obsession isn't just pedantic lawyers being fussy about grammar. It's actually baked into the legal system itself.
Exactly. It's rooted in fundamental legal principles. You've got the Manual of Patent Examining Procedure, the PEP, that's basically the Bible for examiners and drafters. It emphasizes that claims have to be given their broadest reasonable interpretation consistent with the rest of the patent document, the specification. And here's the kicker. Grammar and plain meaning are the ultimate judges of that scope. And this ties directly into a key piece of law, 35 U.S.C. Section 112b. This statute dictates that claims must particularly point out and distinctly claim the invention. Grammatical structure is absolutely essential to avoid what's called indefiniteness. That's a specific legal reason for rejection. If an examiner, or later a judge, can't clearly understand the precise boundaries because the language is vague or ambiguous, they have to reject or invalidate it. The language has to be watertight.
So it really is this kind of grand bargain. The government gives you a temporary monopoly to spur innovation. But the price is you have to fully and clearly tell the public exactly what your invention is. If your language fails, the bargain's off.
Precisely. That's a great way to put it. The language used must be precise enough so that what we call a person skilled in the art. Think of an average expert in that specific field. The peseta can make and use the invention without undue experimentation. basically, without having to guess or spend ages figuring it out. If the grammar is ambiguous, you get one of two really bad outcomes for the inventor. Either it unintentionally narrows the protection, so competitors can easily design around your patent, making tiny changes that technically fall outside your poorly defined claim, or it opens a door wide for challenges. Competitors will argue your claims are just too vague, too indefinite, and therefore unenforceable.
So either you didn't claim enough or you claimed it so badly it doesn't count.
Exactly. And to give you a really concrete example of how serious this gets, our sources point out that seemingly tiny punctuation errors, like a missing comma, have literally killed patents. They subtly altered the meaning of a claim. Imagine a list, maybe A, B, and C. If you miss a comma, does it mean A and B and C, or does it mean A and a combined B and C unit? That tiny mark changes the legal scope. Suddenly, what you thought was protected just isn't. It could be the difference between protecting separate components or a single combined one. That's the level we're operating at.
That's actually mind-blowing. Makes you want to go back and check every email you've ever sent. Okay, so if grammar is the bedrock, where do we start building the invention itself in language? It has to be the nouns, right?
Yeah.
The things. How do these simple words take on such critical, potentially billion-dollar roles?
Right. Nouns are the absolute foundation. But the key insight here isn't just about naming things. It's that consistency isn't just good style. It's a legal mandate. Violating it, maybe with just one wrong the instead of a or shifting terms, can cost fortunes. Nouns represent the core elements, the components, the steps of the invention. In regular English, they're people, places, things, ideas. In patents, they have to be absolutely precise. No vagueness. You're actively fighting ambiguity. You cannot let a competitor or a judge ask, well, what exactly do they mean by module here?
So you have to define everything really tightly.
Exactly. And the basic rules start with consistency. It's non-negotiable. If you introduce something as a censor, it generally needs to stay a censor or the censor or said censor throughout that claim or related claims. Maintain singular or plural forms consistently, too. If you first claim a plurality of processors, you can't suddenly refer to the processor later unless you're clearly introducing a different single one. Countable nouns like device, button, processor, they always need an article a, an, the, or some quantifier like multiple, at least one. Uncountable nouns, though, things like software, data, information, generally don't take an article unless you bound them somehow, like a piece of information or stream of data. And here's a really crucial point for drafters. Avoid proper nouns. Brand names, trademarks like Teflon or Google, avoid them in claims.
Why is that?
Because they can make the claim indefinite. They might imply you're limiting the invention to that specific brand rather than the generic component or material itself. You're claiming the underlying technology, not someone's product.
Okay, so no, an iPhone comprising. It would be a mobile communication device comprising or something like that to keep it generic.
Precisely. You describe the function or structure generically. And this brings us straight to probably the most critical distinction for nouns. Indefinite articles a or an versus definite articles the or, uniquely in patents, said. This distinction is absolutely paramount for what's called antecedent basis. It's a core patent law concept. Basically, every single term in a claim must have clear, unambiguous support earlier in the claim or in the specification. Any element you refer to with the or said must have been introduced first with a or an.
Okay, so you can't just pull the widget out of thin air.
You cannot. The rule is clear. Use a or an, the indefinite ones, for the first mention of an element. This signals you're introducing something new to the discussion. It also tends to allow for broader interpretation, especially with comprising language. Comprising means the list is open. It includes these things, but maybe others too. So a claim like a system comprising a sensor and a controller connected to the sensor. Each A introduces a new thing. Comprising means maybe there's also a battery, even if unstated.
And then, after that first mention,
Then, for all subsequent references to that exact same element within that claim, or independent claims referring back, you must switch to the, or said, the definite articles. This ensures absolute clarity. No question about which specific sensor or controller you mean. Said is often preferred in claims, actually. It sounds a bit archaic, maybe, but it's extremely formal and unambiguous. Said controller leaves zero doubt you mean the controller just introduced.
I can immediately see the common mistake here. Someone just forgets the initial a or an, or they jump straight to the controller without introducing it first.
That's exactly it. That's a classic lack of antecedent basis. If a claim just starts with the sensor, the examiner, or later a judge, is forced to ask, which sensor? The one in Figure 3? Some other sensor mentioned on page 10, or just some generic sensor. That ambiguity makes the claim indefinite under Section 112B. it's fatal. There's a well-known case in Packard where the court found claims indefinite precisely because of ambiguous pronouns and, critically, a lack of clear antecedent basis for key terms. It stopped the inventor getting their patent properly protected. It really hammers home how crucial that choice, just a versus the, can be for potentially millions, even billions, in value.
So what's the strategy? How do drafters avoid this pitfall?
A really common and effective strategy is to draft the claims first. Nail down all your terminology, the elements, their relationships, then go back and meticulously ensure the specification, the detailed description part provides crystal clear definitions and support for every single term used in those claims. That way, everything rests on a solid, unambiguous foundation. Antecedent basis is established from the ground up.
Okay, so it's like building the skeleton first, defining all the bones precisely, before you add the muscle and skin in the description. That makes a lot of sense. Now, what about noun phrases? When you have modifiers attached, like a high-speed data processing unit. How does that work?
Right. Noun phrases the noun, plus its modifiers like adjectives or other nouns need that same crystal clarity because they're delineating the specific nature of the claimed elements. And again, the absolute key is relentless consistency. You cannot use synonyms interchangeably within the claims. If you introduce something as a fastening means, you stick with fastening means. You don't switch to attachment mechanism or connecting element later, even if they mean roughly the same thing in normal English.
Why not? Wouldn't that make it more readable?
In patents, readability sometimes takes a backseat to absolute legal precision. Switching terms invites arguments from competitors or examiners that you meant different things. They said fastening means here, but attachment mechanism, those must be distinct. It creates ambiguity or could unintentionally narrow your claim.
Okay, stick to the script, basically.
Exactly. Let's use a medical device example to make it clearer. A claim might read, an apparatus for monitoring heart rate comprising a wearable band, a heart rate sensor embedded in the band, and a display unit connected to the sensor. See how the core nouns band, sensor, unit are concrete, and they're precisely modified. Wearable, heart rate, embedded, display. This level of specific description is what defines the invention and makes the claim potentially enforceable.
What about abstract nouns like system or module? They seem inherently a bit vague.
They absolutely can be. That's a very common pitfall. Using terms like system or module without rigorous definition can easily lead to indefiniteness. The strategy here is explicit definition in the specification. You essentially create your own dictionary entry for that term within your patent. You'd write something like, as used herein, the system refers to the combination of hardware components X, Y, and software component Z as described in detail below. This gives the term a concrete, specific meaning for the purpose of your patent, overriding its general vagueness. It lets you use a common term but control its interpretation.
And compound nouns. You mentioned data processing unit earlier. The hyphen seems important.
Crucial. Hyphenation in compound nouns is critical. Data processing unit needs that hyphen. It signals it's a single, integrated conceptual unit. If you write data processing unit without the hyphen, it could be misinterpreted. Does it mean a generic unit that happens to process data? Or does it mean data and a separate processing unit? The hyphen binds the words grammatically, preventing that misinterpretation and clearly delineating the invention's components.
Such a tiny mark with such big implications. What about possessives, like the user's preference? That feels like it could be tricky.
You're right, that's another potential minefield. Possessive nouns, like user's input or patient's record, should generally be used sparingly in claims. They can introduce subjectivity, whose preference, or unintended ownership implications, especially in a legal document. It's often much safer and more neutral to use prepositional phrases, input from the user, or a record associated with the patient. It maintains objectivity.
Okay, avoid the possessives where possible. What about gerunds, used as nouns, like processing?
Good question. Gerunds, the E form of a verb acting as a noun, are very common, especially in method claims. For example, a method comprising the step of processing data. Here, processing must function nominally, as a name step, a thing. It shouldn't imply an ongoing action unless that's precisely what you intend to claim. It's related to this idea of nominalization, turning verbs into nouns to create static, definable elements. You're claiming the step of processing, not the action as it's happening.
Right, so it becomes a concrete part of the method.
Exactly. Now, regarding plurals and collective terms, using plurals like sensors can offer flexibility, covering one or more instances of that element. But again, consistency is key. If you introduce sensors, you can't just switch to a sensor later in the same list unless you clearly mean a different single element. Collective nouns like assembly or group are generally treated as singular entities in patent claims. You'd say the assembly comprises, not the assembly comprise. For method claims, using plurals for steps can sometimes indicate variability, like steps comprising, receiving data, processing the data, perhaps implying these steps might be repeated or occur in parallel. There was a significant case, Superguide Corp v. DirecTV, that actually hinged on the grammar in lists, specifically involving plurals. It showed how deeply these choices impact the final legal scope and enforceability.
Wow. It's not just what you call something, but how they relate.
Mm.
It's incredibly detailed. Are there other, maybe more advanced noun issues drafters need to watch out for?
Oh, absolutely. We get into some finer points here. Drafters often act as their own lexicographers, essentially creating a private dictionary within the patent. For specialized technical terms, or even common terms used in a specific way, you must provide an explicit definition in the specification, like we said with module, as used herein, module refers to. This gives you precise control, overriding common usage, but you have to apply it consistently.
So you define your own terms of art.
Precisely. And if you're using foreign words or very specific technical jargon, say from physics or biology, best practice is to italicize them on first use and immediately provide a definition or explanation. For example, the device utilizes a Faraday cage, an enclosure used to block electromagnetic fields to shield the sensor. This ensures clarity for the examiner and, importantly, for that person skilled in the art. Then you have mass nouns like information, energy, water. You can't make them plural in the usual way. You wouldn't say informations. In patents, they often need bounding phrases to make them quantifiable or definable. A quantity of energy sufficient to a stream of information, a volume of water.
Giving them edges, basically.
Exactly. To see how this all fits together, look at a claim set. An independent claim might start broad. A computing device comprising a memory unit, a processing unit coupled to the memory unit, and an input-output interface. Notice a memory unit, first introduction, then a dependent claim narrows it. The device of claim 1, wherein the memory unit is a non-volatile storage medium. C. The memory unit clearly refers back to the one introduced in claim 1, perfect antecedent basis. That consistent referencing makes it legally sound.
That clarity from A to the is really obvious when you lay it out like that. It snaps together.
And then there are the major pitfalls with nouns that can just torpedo a patent. A huge one is using overly broad terms like means or mechanism for without providing specific structure in the description. This triggers a specific law, 35 U.S.C. section 112F, called means plus function claiming. If you use that language, you must disclose the corresponding structure, material, or acts that perform that function in your specification. If you don't intend to use this specific type of claiming, or if you don't fully support every possible means you mention, it can lead to indefiniteness or invalidity. It's generally avoided unless used intentionally and very carefully.
So don't say means unless you really, really mean it and can back it up.
Pretty much. Another pitfall is using nouns that imply functionality, like optimizer, filter, controller, without backing them up with concrete algorithms, structures, or steps in the specification. If you claim an optimizer, but don't explain how it optimizes, what specific steps or structure it uses, it can be ruled indefinite. What is an optimizer, objectively? So strategies for mastery. Create a dedicated glossary while you draft. Keep track of every term and its definition. Use software tools for consistency checks that can catch mismatched terms or antecedent basis errors. And increasingly important, review for gender-neutral language. Use artificial, not man-made, for instance. And for international patents, you absolutely have to consider how nouns translate and ensure the English version aligns grammatically and conceptually across different languages.
It truly sounds like learning a whole new, hyper-specific dialect of English. What about nouns in other parts of the patent, like the abstract or the drawings? Same level of scrutiny.
Good question. Yes, precision still matters, though the format differs. In the abstract, nouns need to be concise and accurate to give a quick overview. A system for data analysis includes processors and sensors. Direct, clear. In the drawings, the labels use clear noun phrases. Figure 1, control circuit. They need to precisely name the depicted elements and match the terms used in the description and claims. So yes, nouns are the bedrock everywhere, ensuring the whole structure is sound.
Okay, so nouns are the static building blocks. Verbs, then, must be what bring the invention to life, describing the actions, the processes. But my gut feeling is that action words would broaden things. How do verbs actually define the limits of an invention? It feels a bit counterintuitive.
That's a really insightful question, because it hits on a core tension. The key is that verbs define not just what the invention does, but the precise scope and boundaries of that action or process. This is absolutely critical, especially in method claims, where each verb marks out a specific protectable step. If the verb is too broad, like just saying processing, without defining how, it might be indefinite. If it's too narrow, you might miss covering important variations. And if it's vague, it might accidentally read on or cover stuff that already exists in the prior art.
So the verb itself becomes a boundary.
Exactly. Let's look at verb forms. In normal grammar, active voice, the processor processes data, is often clearer. The subject does the action. But in patents, you frequently see the passive voice. Data is processed by the processor, or even just data is processed. Why? Often for objectivity. It shifts the focus to the action itself, or the object being acted upon the data, rather than the actor, the processor. It can make the claim feel more universal, less tied to one specific agent.
Interesting. So it's a deliberate choice for legal effect.
Very much so. And in method claims, as we touched on, verbs often appear as gerunds, the ing form, acting as a noun. This delineates discrete, countable steps. So instead of a method where a user inputs data and the system processes it, which sounds like a narrative, you'd structure it as a method comprising receiving input data, processing the input data. Each ing phrase becomes a distinct, almost static element of the claimed method.
Turning actions into defined steps. Okay. What are the big verb pitfalls to avoid? You mentioned vagueness, but what else?
A major one is using absolute verbs like must or shall in the claims. They sound definite, but legally they can be problematic. They can unintentionally narrow the scope too much, implying an absolute requirement. You generally want to describe what the invention does or is configured to do, not what it must do in all circumstances. That must might accidentally exclude valid alternatives or embodiments that still capture the core invention but achieve it slightly differently. If you claim a device must heat to 100 degrees C, what about one that works perfectly well heating to 99 degrees C? Your claim might not cover it.
So avoid locking yourself in too tightly with words like must. What about verb tenses?
Tenses are critical for context. The present tense is king in patents. It's used overwhelmingly for describing the invention's features, how it operates, and especially in the claims themselves. Why? To indicate timeless generality. The invention comprises. The sensor detects, the processor executes. It's not about what's happening right now, but about the inherent capability or function of the invention as a general principle.
Okay, present tense for the invention itself. What about other tenses?
Past tense is generally reserved for describing prior art, what came before your invention, or for recounting specific experiments already performed. Prior art methods failed to achieve, or the experiment showed that. Future tense is rare. You might see it occasionally in prophetic examples describing anticipated results or embodiments that haven't actually been built or tested yet. The resulting compound will likely exhibit enhanced stability, but it's used cautiously.
So sticking mainly to present for the core claims makes sense. What's a common error here?
Inconsistent mixing of tenses is a big one. It creates confusion. If a claim describing the invention suddenly says the sensor detected signals, it implies a past completed action, which is usually wrong for defining the ongoing capability of the invention. It should be detecting signals, or a sensor configured to detect signals. Consistency is key. A good strategy sometimes is using infinitive forms in preambles, like a method to achieve X. It conveys purpose or capability without getting tangled in time.
Right, keeping it general and consistent. How does the specificity of the verb itself impact the claim's scope? Like choosing transmits versus sends.
Great point. Verb choice matters hugely. Transitive verbs, those that need a direct object, like transmits data, processes information, rotates the shaft, are generally preferred for clarity. They explicitly state what is being acted upon. You know the action and its target. Intransitive verbs, those that don't need an object, like functions, operates, reacts, can be okay, but they should be used carefully. If they leave the action vague, they're problematic. The device functions tells you almost nothing legally. The device functions by executing instructions is much better.
So be specific about the action and what it affects. What about modal verbs can, may, could? They seem useful for flexibility.
They are useful, but potentially risky, especially in claims. Modal verbs introduce optionality. The system may include a display. In the specification, they're great for describing different embodiments or possibilities. In some embodiments, the device can connect via Bluetooth. But in the claims themselves, may or can broaden the scope, but they also raise potential enablement issues. Remember enablement. The patent has to teach how to make and use the full scope of the claim. If your claim says the device can do A, B, or C, but your specification only really explained how to do A, then your claim might be invalid for lack of enablement regarding B and C. You haven't taught the public how to do everything you claimed was possible.
So flexibility comes with the responsibility of full disclosure for all options.
Exactly. Also, try to avoid phrasal verbs like carry out, set up, figure out. Replace them with more concise single verbs. Perform, establish, determine. It's cleaner and often less ambiguous. For apparatus claims, claiming a thing, participles are very common to describe capability. A motor configured to rotate the drum, a memory storing instructions. It describes the intended function efficiently.
And tense consistency that applies across the whole document. Abstract description claims.
Absolutely critical. The abstract is usually present tense. The invention provides. The prior art discussion uses past or present perfect. Previous devices have suffered from. The claims are predominantly present tense for the invention's general operation. Any jarring shifts can cause confusion for an examiner or a court. There's another key case, Halliburton Energy Services v. MI LLC. It really highlighted the importance of defining functional verbs or terms. The court found fragile gel indefinite because fragile wasn't defined with objective, measurable parameters in the specification. How fragile is fragile? There was no test, no metric.
So if you use a functional word, you have to define the function objectively.
Precisely. The strategy is define functional terms with specific tests, measurable parameters, or clear algorithms. If you claim something is rapidly heated, define rapidly reaching 100 degrees C in under 5 seconds. Provide that objective boundary. Even watch out for irregular verbs. Input can be a verb to input data, or a noun receiving the input. Ensure the usage is correct and unambiguous. And independent claims, the verbs must logically follow and build upon the verbs in the independent claim. If claim 1 involves transmitting, a dependent claim might add further comprising encrypting the data prior to transmitting. It's a linked chain of actions.
It really is like choreographing a dance of functions. Are there specialized verb uses for specific fields like software or biotech?
Yes, definitely. In software patents, verbs like executes, compiles, renders must be robustly supported by things like flowcharts, pseudocode, or detailed algorithms in the specification. You can't just say the software executes, you need to show how, with enough detail for replication. Similarly, in biotech, verbs like expresses for a gene, hybridizes, amplifies, or binds require strong supporting data sequence listings, experimental results, binding affinity data, protocols. The verb implies a biological function that needs rigorous scientific backing in the patent disclosure. So, connecting it all, verbs are the engine. They animate the invention, turning static parts into dynamic, protectable processes. They define what the invention does, and that definition sets its legal functional boundaries.
Okay, so nouns are the parts, verbs are the actions. Now, adjectives and adverbs, these are the qualifiers, the modifiers. How do you use these to describe the invention accurately without tripping into that deadly trap of ambiguity or subjectivity? Feels like walking a tightrope.
It absolutely is a tightrope walk. Adjectives and adverbs add detail, but they are prime territory for introducing indefiniteness if you're not extremely careful. The core rule for descriptive adjectives is precision and objectivity over vagueness. If you mean a specific shape, use the precise geometric term. Use arcuate or cylindrical instead of the much broader, more subjective curved or rounded.
Specificity is key.
Yes. And here's a huge patent tip, often missed. Avoid subjective terms of degree, large, small, high, low, fast, slow, unless you explicitly define them with metrics or clear examples right there in the specification. Otherwise, what's high temperature to one person might be normal operating temperature to another. It's unenforceable. You wouldn't just claim a large opening. You'd claim an opening having a diameter greater than 5 centimeters, or an opening dimension to receive component X. Give it an objective measure.
So quantify whenever possible.
Exactly. An example of good objective phrasing. An elongate member having a substantially planar surface. Elongate and planar have relatively clear meanings. The absolute pitfall to avoid is any adjective based on personal preference or aesthetics. Aesthetically pleasing, user-friendly, elegant design. These are almost always indefinite in claims because they're purely subjective. There's no objective test for aesthetically pleasing.
Right, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, not the patent examiner.
Precisely. Then you have demonstrative adjectives, this, that, these, those. They're fine in the specification for internal references, as shown in this figure, or that embodiment also includes, but generally avoid them in the claims themselves.
Why avoid them in claims?
Because claims aim for generality. Using this censor might unintentionally limit the claim to the specific censor being discussed right then, rather than any censor meeting the criteria. Keep claims broad and universal where possible. Possessive adjectives, it's, their, need crystal clear antecedents, just like pronouns. Who or what does it's refer back to? No ambiguity allowed.
And comparatives. Faster, stronger, more efficient.
You need a basis. Faster than what? Stronger under what conditions? More efficient compared to which benchmark? You need data, experiments, or clear comparative examples laid out in the specification to support those claims. Otherwise, they're just puffery, legally speaking. Ordinal adjectives first, second, third are very useful and generally safe for organizing lists clearly. A first communication channel and a second communication channel distinguishes them without implying quality. Participial adjectives formed from verbs like a heated chamber, a process signal, are efficient modifiers describing a state or characteristic resulting from an action.
What about colors? Can you claim a red button?
Generally, no, not in utility patents, unless the color is functionally significant and objectively definable. For example, if a chemical indicator changes to a specific, measurable red hue, defined by wavelength, perhaps, to signify a result. But just claiming a red button for looks, no. Design patents are different. They protect appearance, so color can be key there. Numerical adjectives are obviously fine and preferred for objectivity, a resistance between 10 and 20 ohms. And negative adjectives are common and useful. A non-reactive coating, a water-insoluble polymer. Defining by what something isn't can be very precise.
Okay, that covers adjectives. What about adverbs? How do they fit into this precision puzzle, especially ones that seem to add fuzziness, like substantially?
Adverbs modify verbs, adjectives, or other adverbs telling us how, when, where, or to what extent. And their impact on claim scope is huge, particularly those fuzzy ones. Adverbs like substantially, essentially, approximately, about when used in claims, especially in transitions like comprising substantially or measurements like about 10 millimeters are tricky. They can provide some breathing room, some flexibility to cover minor variations. But they are also an open invitation to disputes over meaning if not defined. What exactly does substantially mean? 90%, 95%, close enough.
So they need definition too.
Absolutely. If you use substantially, you should ideally define it in the specification. As used herein, substantially planar means deviating from perfect pronarity by no more than X degrees or Y microns. Give it that objective boundary. Without it, it's inherently risky. Transitional adverbs are also used in descriptions, like generally as described herein, signaling similarity without being strictly identical. The major pitfall with adverbs is the same as with adjectives, using terms of degree without definition, claiming something happens rapidly without defining the time frame, or saying something is loosely connected without defining the degree of looseness. That datamized v. plum tree case we mentioned earlier involved terms like high capacity, which functioned adjectively but lacked metrics. The court said it was indefinite. Same principle applies to adverbs. The strategy, again, define them explicitly. Rapidly means loosely connected allows for X amount of movement.
So the overall advice is use adjectives and adverbs sparingly in claims.
Yes, very sparingly. Prefer quantifiable terms, explicit definitions in the specification, or structural limitations over vague descriptive words whenever possible. Now, in the detailed description part of the specification, you can use them more freely to paint a picture, describe preferred embodiments. The preferred embodiment uses a bright red indicator light for easy visibility. That's illustrative, not strictly limiting like claim language. Adverbs in method claims can be okay if they define the manner of an action clearly, continuously monitoring, sequentially processing. Those have relatively unambiguous technical meanings. Proper use is about adding precision, not fuzziness.
This is just reinforcing how every single word is a calculated legal move. It's intense. Okay, next up, pronouns. They seem like the simplest placeholders, the most harmless words it, they, that. But you're saying a simple it can actually unravel an entire patent claim. How?
It sounds incredible, doesn't it? But yes, pronouns are definitely high-risk words in patent drafting. It's one of the most common and easily overlooked traps. There's one golden rule, and it's absolute. Every single pronoun it, they, which, that, who, even the patent-specific said, must refer unmistakably, unambiguously, to one specific, previously identified noun, its antecedent. There cannot be even a sliver of doubt about what the pronoun refers back to. If there is any ambiguity, the claim is immediately vulnerable to being found indefinite under the law.
One specific noun, no question allowed.
Zero question allowed. Let's look at a clear example. You might write, the system includes a transmitter, said transmitter configured to send data. Here, said transmitter, clearly, and only refers back to a transmitter introduced just before it. Clean, unambiguous. Now, the most common pitfall, the one examiners hunt for relentlessly, is the ambiguous it. In complex sentences, especially those long, winding patent claims, dropping in an it is so easy. But if multiple nouns or noun phrases came before it, which one does it refer to? Consider a device having a power source and a control circuit wherein it regulates voltage. Does it refer to the power source, the control circuit, or the device as a whole?
Yeah, I can see how that could be unclear.
Exactly. And that ambiguity, which might seem trivial to a casual reader, is legal poison. A competitor could argue the claim is indefinite because they can't determine what it means, and therefore can't determine if their product infringes. It creates wiggle room where there should be none.
So that little word it is actually incredibly dangerous here. What about personal pronouns I, we, you? I'm guessing they're completely forbidden.
Absolutely forbidden in patent documents. I, we, you, strictly absent. You always use impersonal constructions to maintain objectivity. You're not telling a story about your invention. You're legally defining a technical entity and its function. The patent is a formal declaration, not a personal account.
Okay, no personal stories.
Yeah.
What about relative pronouns which, that, who?
They're used. Which, that, who introduce clauses giving more information about a preceding noun. A component that performs function X, or a user who inputs data. They can be useful for adding detail, but they still require careful construction. The antecedent, the noun they refer back to, must be absolutely clear. Sometimes nesting these clauses can create ambiguity if you're not careful.
And then there's said. You mentioned it earlier. It's like a special patent word.
It practically is. Said functions as a demonstrative pronoun or adjective in patents. It formally refers back to a previously introduced element. It's often preferred over just using the for subsequent references and claims precisely because it's so formal and leaves absolutely no doubt about the antecedent. It's like saying the aforementioned element X, but much shorter. It screams, I am referring back to that specific thing I just mentioned.
So how do drafters guarantee they avoid ambiguity with pronouns?
The safest strategy, honestly. In long or complex claims, if there's any potential doubt, just repeat the noun. Instead of risking an ambiguous it, write the processing unit again. Yes, it might make the claim slightly longer, maybe feel a bit repetitive, but in patent law, clarity always trumps conciseness or elegance. A slightly clunky but unambiguous claim is infinitely stronger than a sleek but ambiguous one.
Clarity over style. Every time.
Every single time. And case law backs this up repeatedly. There's a case, Ex parte Miyazaki, where the Patent Trial and Appeal Board, PTAB, specifically rejected claims because pronouns lacked clear antecedents. It led directly to indefiniteness. The board simply couldn't figure out what the claims were defining. So the alternative strategy is simple. If in doubt, replace the pronoun. Use the noun or said noun to be absolutely explicit.
Okay. What about using pronouns in the main description, the specification? Is it safer there?
It's safer, yes, because the specification is explanatory, rather than strictly defining the legal boundary like claims do. Pronouns can help the text flow better in the description. But careful review is still crucial. Even in the description, an ambiguous pronoun could confuse a person skilled in the art trying to understand or implement the invention, which could potentially raise enablement or written description issues down the line. Reflexive pronouns, too, like itself, need clear antecedents. And indefinite pronouns, any, each, some, can significantly impact scope and must be used very deliberately to ensure the intended breadth or specificity is achieved and supported. So yeah, they look like simple shortcuts, but in patents, every pronoun is a potential landmine waiting to be stepped on.
A minefield indeed. Okay, moving from pronouns referencing things to prepositions defining relationships. Words like in, on, at, with, by, they seem so small, almost trivial. How do these tiny words pack such a punch in defining the legal scope?
You're right, they are small, but they are incredibly mighty. Prepositions are essentially the spatial and relational glue of a patent claim. They form prepositional phrases that specify location on the surface, time during operation, manner by mixing or other relationships. And in patent claims, getting these relationships exactly right is critical for accurately defining the invention's structure, function, and ultimately its legal boundaries.
So in the box is legally distinct from on the box.
Absolutely distinct. Think about it. A sensor embedded in the casing defines a specific location. A sensor disposed on the casing defines a different location. A sensor adjacent to the casing is different again. These aren't just descriptive choices. They are legally defining the physical relationship between elements. This directly impacts infringement. If your patent claims the sensor is in the casing, a competitor's device with the sensor on the casing might not infringe, depending on other factors, of course. The preposition defines that crucial spatial limit.
Okay, so precision in placement. What are the pitfalls with prepositions?
A major pitfall involves prepositions indicating approximation, words like about, approximately, near. These inherently introduce some fuzziness. They can be used, but they absolutely must be defined in the specification if you want them to hold up. If you claim a dimension is about 10 millimeters, your specification needs to explicitly state what range about 10 covers. Does it mean 10 plus minus 1, 0.10 plus minus of 10%? Without that definition, the term is indefinite because its boundaries are unclear.
Define your bouts. Got it.
Exactly. Prepositions are also absolutely critical in those key transitional phrases we discussed. Comprising, consisting essentially of, the prepositions of and essentially of fundamentally change the scope. Comprising, often considered transition language, not strictly a prepositional phrase and function here, means the list is open. Consisting of means the list is closed, only these elements, nothing more. Consisting essentially of is in between only these elements, plus potentially other things that don't materially affect the invention's basic characteristics. The choice of that transition, often involving a preposition, dictates the claim's entire breadth.
Wow, okay, so those opening words are huge.
Huge. Prepositional phrases are also used to link the invention to standards or protocols, operating in accordance with the Bluetooth 5.0 standard, or analyzing data according to the method described in Publication X. This anchors the invention in established practices. The strategy for precision. Use consistent prepositions for similar relationships throughout the document. If components are always coupled to each other in a certain way, stick with coupled to. Don't switch randomly to connected with or attached upon. Consistency builds clarity. In biotech, you see things like a nucleic acid sequence having at least 95% identity to seqid and 0.1. That identity to phrase precisely defines the relationship and the required similarity, which is vital for gene patents.
And spatial versus temporal, under versus after.
Yes, critical distinction. You need to be precise about whether you're defining where something is, disposed under the substrate, or when something happens, heating after mixing. Using the wrong one can completely change the claim's meaning. So, bottom line, prepositions are the crucial connectors. They define the spatial, temporal, and functional relationships that give the invention its specific, legally defensible structure and scope. Tiny words, massive impact.
It really is like building with Legos.
Yeah.
But the exact way you snap the connectors together defines the whole thing legally. Okay, next. Conjunctions and lists. The connectors like and or, we use them all the time. But you're saying in patents, choosing and versus or can be the difference between having a valid patent and having nothing. How critical can it be?
It's absolutely fundamental. This is where patent language directly intersects with Boolean logic, like in computer science. The choice between and or dictates the logical requirements of the invention, defining what must be present versus what can be an alternative. It's not just about connecting words, it's about defining logical conditions.
Okay, so and means everything is required.
Exactly. And is conjunctive. It joins elements where all listed items must be present for the claim to be met. If a claim recites a processor and a memory and a display, then any infringing device must have all three: the processor, the memory, and the display.
And or means alternatives.
Right, or is disjunctive. It indicates alternatives, meaning usually any one of the listed elements, or sometimes combinations depending on context and drafting style, can be present. A coding selected from the group consisting of polymer A or polymer B. Now, you sometimes see and or used to try and capture both options explicitly. While it's technically permissible in some contexts, it can often broaden the claim significantly and, like modal verbs, raises potential enablement issues. If you claim A and or B, have you truly taught how to make and use the A-only version, the B-only version, and the A and B together version? It can get complex fast. Clarity often favors choosing definitively between and or for specific elements.
So it's really about setting up the exact logical requirements. No fuzzy logic allowed here.
Absolutely none. Now, structuring lists within claims also has specific rules. When you have a list of elements following a transition like comprising, best practice is usually to separate the elements with semicolons.
Semicolons, not commas.
Often semicolons, yes, especially if the elements themselves are complex phrases that might contain internal commas. Semicolons provide a clearer, stronger separation between the main listed items. Comprising a first module configured to receive data, a second module coupled to the first module, and a third module. And the final item in the list should always be preceded by and, or or, if it's a list of alternatives, to clearly signal the end of the list, Module B and Module C.
What about the Oxford comma, that comma before the final "and" in a list like A, B, and C? Huge debate in regular English. What about patents?
In patent drafting, the Oxford comma is not really a debate. It's generally considered crucial for clarity and is typically used
Why crucial?
to prevent ambiguity, especially when list items are complex. Consider comprising elements A, B, and C, and D. Without an Oxford comma after C, does it mean three things? A, B plus C combined, and D. Or does it mean four things? A, B, C, and D. The Oxford comma, A, B, C, and D, makes it unambiguously four separate items. Case law is littered with examples where punctuation in lists, especially the presence or absence of commas like the Oxford comma, significantly altered claim meaning and scope. It's a legal necessity here, not just style.
Okay, Oxford comma is generally a yes in patents. What about other conjunctions, like if, while, because?
Those are subordinating conjunctions. They express conditions, causes, time relationships. You'll find them commonly in the specification to explain how the invention works or under what conditions. The alarm sounds if the temperature exceeds the threshold, but they are generally avoided in the claims themselves. Claims define what the invention is, its structure and components, not usually the conditional circumstances under which it operates. Those conditions are better suited for the description.
So claims are about the what, description is about the how and why. Makes sense. What's the big pitfall with and versus or?
The biggest pitfall is simply choosing the wrong one, fundamentally misrepresenting the logical requirements of your invention, and drastically changing the scope. We mentioned that famous case, Chef America v. Lamb Weston, involving microwavable dough. It wasn't directly and/or, but it showed how related grammatical choices in that case, a preposition linked to the action, drastically changed meaning. Heating to a temperature versus heating at a temperature. One implies reaching it, the other implies maintaining it. That subtle shift, tied to how the elements connected, had huge patentability consequences. It shows how these connecting words define the very essence of the claimed process or structure.
Tiny words, massive consequences. How do drafters ensure clarity with complex lists?
A key strategy, especially with nested logic, is using parentheses for grouping elements within a list. This removes any ambiguity about what and or applies to. Comprising A and B or C makes the logical relationship crystal clear. So, wrapping up conjunctions. They aren't just connectors. They are precision tools that sculpt the logical boundaries and conditions of the invention. They determine exactly what's in, what's out, and what combinations are required or permitted for protection. They are the logic gates of the patent claim.
I'm honestly starting to feel nervous about writing emails now, checking every comma. This whole discussion makes you incredibly mindful of punctuation. We often just sprinkle it in, but you're saying in patent drafting, punctuation is like the silent enforcer. A misplaced comma can actually bring down the whole claim.
That's a perfect way to put it, the silent enforcer. Punctuation in patents isn't decorative, it's structural. It dictates the framework and the internal logic, ensuring unambiguous expression. Get it wrong, and the structure collapses. And perhaps the most fundamental rule, the one that shapes everything else, is that an entire patent claim, no matter how long, how many lines it takes up, how many elements it lists, is considered one single sentence. It starts with a capital letter and ends with a single period. Period.
One sentence. Even those claims that run for half a page.
One single grammatical sentence. This forces every element, every clause, every modifier to logically connect within that single unbroken structure. There's no room for fragmented thoughts or disconnected statements. It has to flow as one coherent definition.
Wow. Okay, so within that single sentence structure, how are specific punctuation marks used?
Very deliberately. Colons typically appear after the preamble and transition phrase to introduce the list of elements or steps in the main body of the claim. A system comprising, then the list starts. Semicolons are generally used to separate the individual elements or steps within that list. Like we discussed, they provide clearer separation than commas, especially for complex items. A processor, a memory coupled to the processor, and an interface.
Okay, colons introduce the list, semicolons separate items in the list. What about commas?
Commas are used sparingly and with extreme precision. They can separate modifiers, a small, efficient motor, but you have to be incredibly cautious. Missing commas, or just as bad, extraneous commas, can drastically alter meaning, unintentionally narrowing or broadening scope. We mentioned the Oxford comma being important. Another example, putting a comma after such as, might imply the following list is exhaustive and limiting rather than illustrative examples. Tiny mark, huge potential change in meaning.
And hyphens. You mentioned them with compound nouns.
Absolutely critical. Hyphens are essential for forming compound nouns or adjectives, data processing unit, high-frequency signal, to ensure the words function as a single conceptual unit. Without the hyphen, ambiguity reigns. High-frequency signal could mean a signal that is high in amplitude and also has a frequency, or could mean a signal with a high frequency. The hyphen clarifies it's the latter. Quotation marks are used mainly in the specification to set off terms being explicitly defined, as used here in widget means, or sometimes to quote prior art, rarely used in claims themselves unless quoting something specific like a defined standard. Parentheses are used for alternatives, examples, a polymer, for example, polyethylene, or sometimes for acronyms after defining them. Careful they don't introduce ambiguity about whether the parenthetical is limiting or just illustrative. Dashes, or woolly, are generally avoided in formal patent claims. Their use for emphasis or parenthetical asides in normal writing is too ambiguous for claim language. And apostrophes only for possessives, user's input, but as we said, used sparingly, often preferring prepositional phrases, input from the user, for neutrality.
So it sounds like missing punctuation is just as dangerous, maybe more so, than using the wrong mark.
Often, yes. Missing punctuation is notorious for causing claim indefiniteness or completely changing the intended meaning. That classic case, Eaton v. Evans, about printed circuit boards. It famously hinged on missing punctuation that merged two distinct steps, fundamentally altering what the patent actually claimed and leading to loss of protection. It's a powerful lesson. And remember, drafters aren't just following standard English rules. They must adhere to specific USPTO formatting and punctuation guidelines found in the MPEP, which can sometimes differ, adding another layer of complexity.
How do people master this? It seems so easy to make a tiny, costly mistake.
Practice, diligence, and specific techniques. One really useful technique is reading claims aloud. Slowly. Does it flow logically? Are there awkward pauses or places where the meaning stumbles because of punctuation or lack thereof? It helps catch ambiguities your eyes might skim over. And of course, multiple rounds of thorough review and cross-checking against guidelines like the MPP and internal checklists are absolutely essential. No substitute for careful proofreading by multiple trained eyes. Ultimately, punctuation isn't just grammar, it's the blueprint's framework. It provides the precise structure and internal logic, making it just as vital as the words themselves in drawing those clear, defensible lines around an invention.
Mind truly blown by the power of the semicolon. Okay, so we've looked at words, punctuation. What about the overall architecture, the sentence structure itself, especially in claims? How do these often incredibly long, complex sentences maintain legal integrity and clarity?
Right, it's about the architecture of protection now. The sentence structure in patent documents, particularly claims, is unique and highly deliberate, designed specifically for legal precision. The fundamental structure of a claim, as we said, is typically a single, often very long, complex sentence that functions grammatically as a giant noun phrase. It starts by naming the invention, the preamble, states the relationship of its parts, the transition, like comprising, and then meticulously lists those parts and their connections, the body.
And within that structure, you have different types of claims,
Yeah.
right? Independent and dependent.
Exactly. That's a key part of the architecture. Independent claims stand alone. They define the broadest scope of the invention, capturing the core inventive concept. Think of it as the main outline. Dependent claims then refer back to an independent claim or another dependent claim and add further limitations or specific features. They narrow the scope. A dependent claim incorporates all the limitations of the claims it depends on, plus its own added limitation.
So it's like starting broad and then adding layers of specificity.
Precisely. It creates a hierarchy. If the broad independent claim is somehow invalidated, maybe it covers prior art, the narrower dependent claims might still survive because they claim a more specific, potentially novel version. It's a fallback strategy built into the structure.
How does sentence structure differ elsewhere in the patent?
It varies by section. Abstracts aim for maximum conciseness, so they tend to use simpler sentences to give a quick snapshot. The specification, the detailed description, often uses more complex and compound sentences. It needs to explain the invention thoroughly, discuss different embodiments, detail how components interact. That often requires more elaborate sentence structures to convey the relationships. But claims have that unique, highly structured, single complex sentence format we've been discussing. Preamble, transition, body with elements listed. It's rigid by design for legal interpretation.
That complexity must create its own risks, though. like run-on sentences in normal writing.
Absolutely. That's a major pitfall in claim drafting. While it's one sentence, it can become a run-on in the sense of being overly convoluted, tangled, or just plain hard to follow. If the phrasing is too complex, if clauses dangle ambiguously, if modifiers aren't clearly attached to what they're modifying, it leads straight back to ambiguity and indefiniteness. An examiner or judge has to be able to clearly parse the sentence to understand the exact scope. If they can't, the claim fails.
So clarity within complexity is the goal. How do drafters achieve that?
One key strategy is breaking down complexity using dependent claims. Instead of trying to cram every possible feature and limitation into one monstrous independent claim, you put the core elements in the independent claim and then add specific features, alternative embodiments, or narrower ranges in a series of dependent claims. Each dependent claim adds just one or a few focused limitations, making the overall scope easier to understand layer by layer. It segments the complexity.
Are there other special structures used?
Yes, there are specific claim formats for certain situations. We mentioned Jepson claims earlier. They explicitly recite the known prior art in the preamble and then use wherein the improvement comprises to pinpoint the novel addition. Useful for inventions that are clearly improvements on existing tech. And Markush groups are another specialized structure used to claim alternatives for a component using a specific format, selected from the group consisting of A, B, and C. This clearly defines a limited set of options for that element. These specialized formats just underscore that claim structure isn't accidental, it's deliberately engineered. The careful logical construction ensures the invention's definition progresses clearly, allowing for precise legal interpretation and hopefully strong enforcement. It's the architectural blueprint for legal protection.
We've covered so much ground, the rules, the immense risks, the almost unbelievable level of precision required. As we start to wrap this up, what are the most common mistakes drafters still make, even knowing all this?
Yeah.
And more importantly, how can they really master this incredibly specialized linguistic art form?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? Because despite all the rules and training, errors are persistent. Probably the single most common and damaging error is inconsistency. Using different terms for the same element across different parts of the patent, shifting verb tenses without reason, defining a term one way in the spec and using it slightly differently in a claim. This kind of inconsistency immediately creates ambiguity and raises red flags for examiners and litigators.
So internal consistency is paramount. What else?
Vagueness and ambiguity themselves, of course. Using those subjective words like high or strong without definition. Using pronouns with unclear antecedents. It. Failing to provide objective boundaries for functional terms. This is the heartland of indefiniteness rejections. Overbreadth is another huge one. Claiming more than your specification actually supports or enables. You might claim a method works with any solvent, but if your description only provides examples and data for 3 specific solvents, your claim for any solvent might fail for lack of enablement or written description. You haven't taught how to use the full scope claimed.
You have to back up everything you claim.
Every piece of it. And then there are just basic grammatical errors, mismatched subjects and verbs, faulty parallelism, and lists things that might seem minor but can genuinely confuse the relationship between components and actions in a complex claim sentence. You can actually learn a lot about common errors by reading decisions from the Patent Trial and Appeal Board, PTA. They publish their decisions, and they often detail exactly why a claim was found indefinite or unpatentable, providing real-world examples of these pitfalls.
Okay, so those are the traps. How do drafters or inventors working with them actually get it right? What are the best practices for achieving mastery in this minefield?
Mastery really comes from a blend of rigorous process, deep knowledge, and painstaking attention to detail. Iterative review is absolutely fundamental. No patent application should rely on a single person's drafting and review. It needs multiple eyes, the inventor checking technical accuracy, the patent attorney or agent checking legal and grammatical precision, maybe senior reviewers, sometimes even external consultants. It's a collaborative process specifically designed to catch errors and ambiguities.
Safety and multiple reviewers. What else?
Using established templates is a big help. Good templates ensure consistent structure, inclusion of all necessary legal sections, required boilerplate language. They provide a solid framework and reduce the chance of simply forgetting something important. Constant consultation of the MPKP, the Manual of Patent Examining Procedure, is non-negotiable. It's the rulebook. You don't guess. You check the MPEP for guidance on claim format, terminology, punctuation, everything. Peer review is also incredibly valuable. Having another experienced drafter, someone not involved in the initial writing, read the claims specifically looking for clarity issues, potential ambiguities, alternative interpretations, that fresh perspective can be invaluable. And increasingly, using specialized software tools can provide an assist. These tools can automatically check for things like antecedent basis errors, inconsistent terminology, claim dependencies, potentially indefinite words. They're not a substitute for human review, but they act as a helpful safety net.
So it's a combination of human expertise, process, and technology.
Exactly. And the goal of mastering all this, the bigger picture, isn't just about avoiding rejection letters from the USPTO. It's about crafting patents that are truly robust and enforceable. Patents that can stand up to intense scrutiny during litigation, that provide meaningful, durable protection for the invention, and that ultimately secure the value derived from all that R&D investment. It's about ensuring those carefully chosen words translate into real-world competitive advantage, safe from being undone by a stray comma or a vague adjective.
Wow. What a journey. We've really taken a fascinating, almost microscopic look into a world where every single word, every comma, every hyphen carries just the enormous legal and financial weight. It's truly a profound testament to the level of precision needed in patent drafting. It turns grammar from, maybe a dry subject into something incredibly high stakes and captivating.
It really does. This whole dive through patent grammar underscores that language here isn't just for communication. It's a powerful precision instrument. When wielded correctly, it defines ownership, it clarifies innovation, it enables investment, and it quite literally shapes the future of technology by granting or denying control over new inventions. It's a quiet but incredibly powerful force driving the innovation economy.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. The next time you come across what seems like a trivial grammatical choice, maybe in an email you're writing, a contract you're about to sign, even just reading a technical paper, pause for a second. Consider the billions of dollars, the future of entire industries, that can genuinely hinge on exactly that kind of precision in the world of patents. What hidden legal or practical consequences might your own words carry, even unintentionally? And just how much of our modern, tech-driven world relies on this incredibly meticulous, high-stakes, and often invisible dance with language? It's definitely something to think about before you hit send.